Hello! Welcome to part 2 of my 2023 reads. If you watched the last video, this is a continuation because I realized my video was going on for a long time. I'm just going to go through all of the books that I read in 2023 to make up for lost time, but I'm trying to do it pretty much as quickly as I possibly can. This is a bit of like a speed dating round with the books that I read last year, and I'm super excited to get through the second half of the year, so come on down! God. Don't tell my boyfriend, it's not what he's made for. What was I made for? Hey, we're picking right back up. We're losing daylight. Next up, I still have the bookmark in it. Jurassic Park by Michael Crichton. You may be thinking, what possessed you to read this book? Well, I love the movie. Who doesn't? And I want to just see what the book was about, because usually even if it's a movie and it's a story I already know, I like to read the source material. So obviously I know what happens in this book, but I just wanted to see what the book was like. And the book was great. This was a really, really fun read. I read this in the summer. This was a great summer read. This is about a millionaire who invests in this island that recreates dinosaurs by duplicating their DNA. Dino DNA. This is so fun. This had more science in it than I'd say the movie. I'd say the movie, they saturated it down even more, but I think the author does a great job at not treating you like you're stupid. Like he has to like talk to you like you're 5 about science and about DNA, but he also doesn't do it in a way that assumes that you're a PhD in bio and you know these things. He just strikes a great tone in how he explains how the dinosaurs were recreated. And this just brings up some great philosophical questions. Ian Malcolm, who's Jeff Goldblum in the movie, best character in the book, in my opinion, he's kind of the philosophical heart of the book, and he just brings up some great points of like, just because we can do something, is this something we should do? Has science gone too far? Is like literally what this book is about. But it's great. Super fun, super easy read, fast read. I think I read this in a couple of days. I was borrowing this from my friend Kelsey. So Kelsey, this was excellent. Definitely recommend if you haven't read it yet. This was great. Jurassic Park. Dino DNA. Oh, next up. Next up we have the equivalent of just pain. This book is pain. But call me crazy, but I love it. It's Jude the Obscure by Thomas Hardy. When did it end? This book was so sad. This is about Jude. He is a stonecutter. This is end of the 19th century England in Thomas Hardy's famous Wessex, which is like his creation, basically his imagined province of England. Jude is a stonecutter. He comes from kind of humble origins, but he really loves reading, loves the classics, and he wants to dedicate his life to academia. He wants to be a professor, a lecturer. He just has loftier aspirations to be in the academic life. But things just keep getting in his way, and he also meets his estranged cousin, Sue Brideshead, who is basically like a new woman. She doesn't want to get married. She's an artist. She has like different ideas. These two are first cousins, but they fall in love and they want to be together, and there's just so much that gets in the way of them being with each other, and I won't go into details, but this book ripped my heart out. Like, this book destroyed me. It's the only time you will really see me root for first cousins being together, because usually that's disgusting, but these two, like, they had to be with each other. It just, like, they were meant for each other, but there's so much that gets in the way. And Thomas Hardy, I think, often writes about people have desires, people want things, but society just gets in the way, and we should be re-examining that. Literally, Thomas Hardy got bullied to never write another novel. He got bullied so hard, he went, you know what, I'll just stick to poetry, and this was his last novel. And I get it, because I wanted to yell at him. I was like, what are you doing? Just so tragic. A lot of this was so tragic, but the writing, the characters, it was so rich. This was definitely one of my favorites of 2023. I will not stop thinking about this book. Do I want to read it again and go through that again? I don't know. I might not, but this was just amazing. So pick it up if you want to cry. Great. Something equally as dark, but equally, I read these back to back, and I think this was just like the zenith of the year because this book also was one of my favorites of the year. I gave it 4 stars, but I've been thinking about it so much I really think I'm gonna bump it up to 5. This is for my book club. Thank you, book club, for getting me to read this. It's Wide Sargasso Sea by Jean Rhys. So good. I hesitate to tell too much about this book. It is a prequel to Jane Eyre. That's really all you should know. It's about a particular character in Jane Eyre. So if you've not read Jane Eyre, you can read this, but I would strongly recommend reading Jane Eyre first and then read this, especially because another character in the book isn't named, but you know exactly who it is, and you just see a whole side of that character that you're like, oh, this explains a lot. The imagery in this book, the writing is so odd, like so off kilter and so weird, but in such a good way. Now I'm like, I want to read all of Jean Rhys's stuff. I'm just so obsessed with the way she writes. And the characters, some of the conversations that the characters have, the man and Christophine's discussion, oh mama, she tore into him and she needed to. There's some beautiful imagery in here that, again, I'm always thinking about this book. Like, I cannot stop thinking about this book. My sweet boyfriend bought me this copy, and he bought the critical edition, which has some great footnotes, like really great footnotes and really great essays about, because this takes place on the island of Dominica in the 19th century, and it just provides some great context. So if you are able to pick up this book, I do strongly recommend getting, this is the Norton Critical Edition, strongly suggest getting this because it gives you some great context. And I was able to, like, in my book club be like, and that I know about that, and I know about that, because I have this particular edition. This is excellent, and I will be rereading this at some point because it was just so, oh my god, so good. So good. Honestly, those two were 2 of my favorite books of the year. I really think I'm gonna give that book a 5-star, now that I'm thinking about it. Moving along. We've got Orlando by Virginia Woolf. Really, truly, I was really on a roll because this book also was fabulous. Fabulous. So good. So good. Virginia Woolf, for me, Virginia Woolf is like slowly becoming one of my favorite writers, and I didn't think she would. I was a little afraid of her writing when I first encountered it. The first book I ever read by her was To the Lighthouse. That one's intense, and also I don't know if I would start with that one. I would maybe start with Orlando if you've never read any of her books. This one is like the most fantastical of hers. It's about this young nobleman in Elizabeth I's court. He's like this young dandy. He's kind of an immortal being, and at some point, no explanation, he just changes genders. He wakes up and he's a woman, and it's just but he never really ages, and it's just this exploration of gender and gender roles throughout these different periods of English history, and it's so good. Also, I usually hate movie tie-in editions, but this has Tilda Swinton in Ruffs. It's not really focusing, but Tilda Swinton in Ruffs, like, how can I not take this? She was in the movie version directed by Sally Potter, which is 5-star film. So good. If you like Sofia Coppola, watch Orlando. This was excellent. This was excellent. Excellent! Virginia, if you're there somewhere, I love you. It's a completely different change of pace, and not one that I was like, oh, like, those top 3 are like ones I really adored. This one I liked, but I wouldn't say I was like goo goo gaga over. It's A Walk in the Woods by Bill Bryson. I've been wanting to read this for a long time. I don't know why. I just was always attracted to it. This is basically it's a memoir, nonfiction, of him attempting to hike the entire Appalachian Trail on the East Coast. I have hiked just a teeny, like this bit for like a couple hours. I was on the Appalachian Trail in the White Mountains in New Hampshire. And this is just about him trying to attempt it with another friend of his. And they, at times, are just woefully unprepared. They get discouraged. It's very difficult, but it's just about him just like trekking on and talking about the different parts of the Appalachian Trail, and also giving good just history of the Appalachian Trail. I didn't really know much about it, or know that it's maintained just by volunteers. There's no like paid people who maintain the Appalachian Trail. It's all done by volunteers, which it's like one of the largest volunteer networks in the country, which I think is fascinating. This was great, very enjoyable, very funny, lighthearted. This was good. This was very good. I love to hike. I wouldn't say I'm the most outdoorsy person in the world, but I do love to hike, and I do harbor like kind of a little secret pipe dream that someday I'll do a little bit more of the Appalachian Trail. So this both inspired me and also discouraged me. Honestly, Bill Bryson could do it, I could probably do it, come on. He was a man in his like 40s, and he and his friend were like a little overweight, and they could do it. So, you know, I could probably do it. But that's A Walk in the Woods. Very good summer read. Next. I'm a huge nerd, and if I like a book, especially a classic, that is about a historical event or is around a historical event or just like has something in it that I know I could do further reading on, I will do it. And for some odd reason, it's a very specific niche, but I love nautical books. I love a nautical book. I love books about the sea. I love pirates. I love the Navy. I love anything that has to do with like men figuring things out on a boat. And I love Moby Dick, which is something I will do a video on, I'm sure, because Moby Dick does not get the credit it deserves. But I wanted to know more about what inspired Moby Dick, and the whale ship Essex, the crash of the whale ship Essex, is what inspired Moby Dick. So this is a nonfiction account of the whale ship Essex. It's In the Heart of the Sea by Nathaniel Philbrick. This was really good. This is another one, which I think I'll make a video about this, about nonfiction. That's easy to read if you don't like nonfiction. This I would highly recommend if you don't like historical books, if you don't like nonfiction, history bores you, it's that, no. Read this one, because the way he lays it out is so narrative and so engaging. I was speeding through this book. Photos of like old paintings or old writings. So good. Horrifying. Not like for the light of heart. This isn't like I wouldn't say this is like a nonfiction where you're like, no, the subject matter's dark, and that's what made it difficult to get through. But the writing style itself, you'll breeze through. It's just so interesting. It's basically just a whale ship from Nantucket, and a giant whale crashes them, which is where Moby Dick ends. But this book continues in how the survivors get through the ordeal of being shipwrecked, being cast away on an island, and trying to get back to civilization. And it is horrifying. Not for the faint of heart. You will want to keep a large jug of water near you while you read this, because I was thirsty just reading it. Next up was a very surprising little book. A surprising little read. I wasn't expecting much from this at all, and then I loved it. It was The Summer Book by Tove Jansson. Again, another book club pick. The book club really be picking some good reads, I gotta say. We read more obscure ones, but they're always good. They're always good, and this one is no exception. Tove Jansson is I always forget, is she Swedish? I think she's from Sweden, but she's part of a Finnish minority of Swedes. She's more known for her Moomin Troll books, so that's what she's most famous for. But a lot of other books she wrote, she kind of wanted to get away. She didn't want to be the Moomin Troll lady, so she wrote other types of books and more mature books. This one, I'd say any age can enjoy this. It's very like loose stories that center around this little girl, she's about 8, and her grandmother, who are staying on an island for the summer. And the father's there, but he's not really a character. It's mostly about these two. And they kind of hate each other. They kind of don't get along. The little girl is like very headstrong and like a little precocious. And the grandmother's like tired and annoyed. And so they constantly are like at each other's throats a little bit, but they also, like, you can tell, deeply love each other, and they really only have each other for companionship. And so it's just a bunch of interconnected stories about their time on this summer on this island. And it's just lovely, because it's so deceptive. You're like, oh, okay, like, they're picking rocks. But, like, a stuff underneath, there's so much going on. And a lot of the discussions in the book club really revealed a lot more than what met the eye when I first read this. So this is lovely. For the summer, I read this in late summer, it was perfect for that. Perfect. Great stuff about storms and collecting rocks and just discovering this little tiny island is just so cool. So love this. This was great. Big wall of books getting started up. We are losing daylight, we gotta move! I just get excited. I get very excited. And I say that and then I take it back because this book didn't excite me. This was The Red Tent by Anita Diamant. This was okay. This was only okay. What made me pick this book up? I don't really know. I had just like heard a lot about it and people seemed to really love it, and I was like, oh yeah, like I'll read that. It's basically about a very, very obscure woman in the Old Testament named Dinah, and it gives her some more background. Because oftentimes in the Bible, a woman will be mentioned and she kind of just disappears. Either she gets killed or she just disappears. She's not really a major character. But this like fully fleshes out her life. Of course, it's a work of fiction. If you are like very into the Bible and you are a Bible scholar and you like things to be by that book, literally, This doesn't. This takes definite creative liberties, and I know folks in more religious crowds are not happy about this book because it takes some liberties. I say that book is as old as can be. It's the oldest reference material we have. You know, run for it. The beginning of it was very good. She's raised by her mother and the mother's sisters, so she basically has all these mothers, and they're all very interesting, and their relationships and how they interact is great. And I wished it was just kind of that, but then it goes on to her marriage in Egypt, and it just, like, the second and third acts of the book, I was like, no. I just got bored. Everything felt a little too wrapped up, a little too convenient. The writing was, like, everybody kept talking about, like, oh, the writing is so beautiful. And I was a little like, yeah, but I feel like it's trying too hard. Like, this is beautiful writing for people who aren't used to reading really beautiful writing. And that sounds awful, and like a little patronizing, but just, I didn't find it that beautiful. I was like, I think you're trying too hard to be, like, flowery and gorgeous and kind of sounding Old Testament-y. It just, it didn't do it for me, so I was pretty underwhelmed by this and kind of was ready for it to be done. And now it's done, and it's going into a little free library, so that's the Red Tent. I have to say, on the whole, I pick some great books, and I'm usually very happy with the books I pick, but they can't all be good. If you're taking a little bit of a risk in branching out and trying to read something you don't usually read, you're gonna wind up. However, sometimes you take a risk, and it pays off, and that's called Rooster Fighter by Shu Sakuratani. This is so out of my comfort zone. I have never read manga. There's been a huge manga craze the past couple of years, but I, for a long time, was resistant to manga because I was like, come on, it's basically a comic book. How good could it be? This was just pure fun. And I was reading this alongside other books that I'm going to talk about in a minute, and I just needed something fun. I was in these really dense, very sad books, and I was like, I just need something light. I laughed so freaking hard at this book. The premise is that he is a rooster that fights crime. The clincher, his, like, finishing move, is a sonic boom cock-a-doodle-doo. Come on. This is the first manga I ever read, so it was a bit of a learning curve in reading it. You have to read it the other way, because everything goes the opposite way, so that was a bit of a learning curve. But once I was in it, and I finished this in a day. Like, this was just, like, read. And I want more. Like, I want to read more manga, and I specifically want more Rooster Fighter. He was a rooster, but he also was, like, kind of how Stewie in Family Guy will be an evil baby, but he also does, like, he has baby mentality about things. It was the similar thing with the rooster where he'd be like, I need revenge. But then he'd be like, oh, I loved feed. I love chicken feed. Like, just so goofy. You want a good time. This was so fun. This is where we get into what books I was reading during Rooster Fighter that made me want something as light as Rooster Fighter. What possessed me to read these two at the same time? I wasn't thinking. I really should have thought a little bit more. But one of them was And the Band Played On by Randy Schultz. This was, even though, yes, very dark, very depressing, excellent nonfiction. Excellent, excellent, excellent nonfiction. This is really almost as good as it gets. I would not say this is one, if you don't like nonfiction, I would not say start with this, because this does get, it is narrative, but it is a bit dense. It's literally big. But I had sent a video that I wanted to get to this book, and I'm so glad I did. This basically talks about the very, very early years of the AIDS epidemic, and it's written as it's happening. This was published in '87, which, of course, as we know, the AIDS epidemic is still ongoing. Even by '87, it was still pretty recent, but this is about the years, like, '78, when the first supposed cases were coming out, up until '85. And it just shows how much of I really didn't know, probably because I learned about AIDS kind of just as an overall scope, but this gets really into the nitty-gritty, how much of a nightmare it was. This was a nightmare, like, a health crisis-wise, bureaucratic-wise, emotional-wise, just a huge catastrophe, and just mishandled on so many levels, and this showed it, how mishandled it was. I always used to blame a certain president for being the reason that it got so bad, but it was bad even before it got to him. Did he do anything? No. But it was bad before it got to him. So this shows how politically it was mishandled, bureaucratically, and the science bureaucracy. I was like, oh my god, I can't believe this is the way this functions. And just narratives that were given to me about this were disproven, completely disproven. And I was shocked and horrified. And outraged. This will outrage you. Which, you know, as we know, it was handled the way it's handled and we can only move forward, but truly I was outraged at the way this pandemic was treated. This epidemic was treated. Arm yourselves with knowledge, friends. Oh, I forgot one. My bad. I forgot one. Because I don't have it. I borrowed it from my boyfriend's mom, which was lovely of her. Thank you, Tina. This was Crying in H Mart by Michelle Zauner. This was good. This was very, very good. Michelle Zauner is more known for her participation in her band Japanese Breakfast. So she's more known as a musician. This is her first ever writing venture. I think she did a fantastic job. This is basically just about her relationship with her mother. So her father is white American, her mother is from Korea, and it's about their life and her growing up with her mother, and her mother getting cancer and her helping her mother in her kind of her final years. And it's just a great exploration of a mother-daughter relationship. It's that kind of relationship where they love each other so intensely that it comes out almost as hate. Like they just are so close that they just want to kill the other one, which you can't explain that kind of relationship to anybody. And I won't say it's for every mother-daughter relationship, but there were things in there where I was like, that is something a mother would say, and that is probably something as a daughter I've done, and it just hits really close. People I know who don't like this book are usually men. I don't know if this was for you. I'm sorry, but this is for the ladies. And their mothers. But it was excellent. It also talks about her relationship with food, which I would have wanted a little bit more of. I felt like the food part of it was a little bit lost as we kept going. I love Korean food, so I was like, tell me more. Tell me more about how you were making the bibimbap. I really want to know. Do I think it was the strongest writing I've ever read? No. But again, this is her first memoir. This is her first full-length written thing. So I'm gonna give her props. I think it was still for a first. I was like, that's pretty good. Crying in H Mart. Lovely. I don't think memoirs and autobiographies get enough love, so I'll make a video about those as well, because I think they get kind of shafted, but I love a memoir and a biography. I love them. So I'll talk about that one later. This is it. No, it's not the last book. We still have a ton of books to talk about, but we've made it to my favorite book of 2023, which I read from August to the very beginning of October. I took a long time with it, and I couldn't have been happier that I did, because she's the best. Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. Do you hear the people sing? That was off key. This book was excellent. Nothing about this book was off key. Every key was hit in this book. How he was able to manage to do that for how many pages here? 1,194 pages? How he was able to do that is absolutely incredible to me. If you are not familiar with Les Mis, first of all, where have you been? It spans a period of French history from the 1810s to the 1830s, which isn't that long of a period, but there was a lot going on. Specifically, this follows Jean Valjean, who is a convict who turns his life around. He's released from prison, and he's trying to turn his life around. He tries to help out a poor sex worker named Fantine, who's come down on her luck, and he helps raise her daughter, Cosette. And all the while, he's kind of been breaking parole, so there's this police officer named Javert who's trying to track him down. It's a bit of their cat and mouse. But when I say that that's just like one aspect of it, there's just so many layers to this. That's at the core, but there's just so much built around it. And while he goes through the story, he'll also intersperse these essays. There's a whole, 50 pages dedicated to talking about the Battle of Waterloo. And at first you're like, this is before the events of the book, why does this even matter? No, it matters, because he gives you so much context that then you're able to appreciate the actual character events of the book so much more. So yeah, you may think, no, this is all unnecessary. No. All necessary. Everything in this book is necessary, and I will fight anyone who tries to argue differently. He goes into the Paris sewers. He goes into the Paris sewer system for so long, but I was riveted. I was like, tell me more. I want to know about the Paris sewer system. And then that just informed the whole context for the scene, this one very pivotal scene. It just makes so much sense. The writing is beautiful, the characters are beautiful. I know how this ends because I've known the musical since I was a very little kid, and I've loved it since I was a little kid, So I knew the ending, I knew what was gonna happen, and I still sobbed. Like, I put the book down and just sobbed, and I didn't want it to end. Like, I want to go back and live in this book. My boyfriend's reading it right now, and every so often I just pick up his copy and I'm like, oh, that's where he is. Oh, he's with the bishop? I love the bishop. Like, I just want to like relive it. I made him watch the musical. Like, I have so much even more love for the musical now that I've read the foundational big brick. But when I tell you it's worth it, it's worth it! Mwah. Favorite book of 2023, without a doubt, 5,000 stars. Les Miserables. Just do it. Just take the time. You don't have to rush. Everybody thinks you have to rush. No. I took 2.5 months to read that book, and I couldn't have been happier I took that time. Take its time. It's meant to be savored. Once I finished Les Mis, I was like, look, we need something quick. Boom, boom, boom. I need to move through a book quickly, so what better than a Japanese novel? Because they're usually quite brief. Unless it's The Tale of Genji. I don't know when I'm getting to that one. Usually they're brief, and this one was brief. The Woman in the Dunes, Kobo Ebe. She be brief, but do not be deceived. She's meaty. Like, there was a lot going on in this book. This follows a man. He is kind of like an amateur bug enthusiast, as one does. And over a weekend, he goes to look for bugs in these dunes, but he misses his last bus home. And the villagers of this little seaside dune town are like, hey, no problem, you can just stay with this woman, she'll put you up for the night. And he's like, okay, cool. Important to note, her house is at the bottom of these dunes, so he gets down by a rope ladder, he goes to sleep, he wakes up the next day and the rope ladder's gone. And he's like, hey, I'm ready to go. And they're like, no, you're gonna stay here. She's like, you're gonna stay and help me dig my house out every day from falling sand at the bottom of this pit. So he gets kidnapped essentially, and he's living with this woman, now kind of as her husband / co-worker in figuring out how to make sure the sand doesn't ruin the house. Existential, philosophical, terrifying concept, fantastic movie. I think 1964. It's Criterion, it's a classic, it's so good. It really captures like how terrifying the situation is, but it's mostly just very like existential. This is a very, very existential novel. So yes, while it's very short, I still was like, oh, whoa, he just dropped it. Like that sentence, he just dropped a bomb there. Excellent. This was really excellent, and I want to read more of his novels, but specifically if you're gonna start with one, Woman in the Dunes, this was really good. We're getting there, I swear. We're getting there. Saltwater Buddha. Jamal Yogis. I think I was still like, I'm still so depressed from And the Band Played On and Les Mis and Woman in the Dunes that I was like, I just need something truly light. Like something I'll read quickly, but also is just light content. And that was this book. I picked this up from a thrift store just with no knowledge of it. I was just like, this seems cool. And it was cool. This is a memoir. It's about Jamal Yogis. He was just kind of disillusioned with life. I think he was only in high school, but he was like, I don't want to do this. I hate suburbia. I want to be out. So he takes some money from his parents. He only has $800 and he moves to Hawaii. And he's just like, I'm going to surf in Hawaii. His parents are oddly chill with it. My parents would be like, get your butt home. And it's just about him figuring out his relationship with surfing and his relationship with Buddhism and how he kind of applies Buddhism to surfing. And it's almost like a warmer version and a more happy version of Into the Wild. Because I'm like, very similar theme of like, young man is disillusioned, he's a little naive, he like runs away from society. But the difference with him is, while Christopher McCandless I don't think was self-aware at all, he has, even as he was young in those days, he still had a shred of self-awareness. He kind of went, oh shoot, I'm gonna make my parents upset. Oh wait, I don't have money, what am I gonna do? Like, he was a little bit more grounded, which led to him going down a much better path and living. He also wasn't going to Alaska, so he was gonna live because it was warm. It's just about him kind of figuring it out, and this was very light, very, very light read, easy read. Why I read this in October, I don't know. This is definitely a better summer read. I'm usually a very intuitive seasonal reader, so if it's, you know, cold and wintry, I want something wintry. This was just purely like, I want to read that. And so I picked it up. It was good. I wouldn't say this blew my mind, this didn't change my life, but it was good. We have my obligatory Stephen King yearly read. Every year I read one Stephen King book. He has so many books that this will probably last me my entire life, but I don't want to read 2 in a year because it's just, I love Stephen King. He's a great writer. I will fight anyone who thinks he's not a good writer. But two is too much. I've learned that with Dickens as well. I read one Stephen King a year. It's not always around Halloween, but often it's around Halloween. I've read Carrie, The Shining, and I've read, what was last year? Oh, last year was Misery. 5-star, excellent. So this year I read Salem's Lot. I think we all know, I think I won't spoil anything for Salem's Lot. If you don't know, it's about vampires. It's about vampires that move into this small town and they slowly just overtake it. This was really good. I would not say this was my favorite Stephen King, but he's doing what he does very well. He's setting very creepy scenes. He's not telling you a whole lot. He's just letting it kind of slowly unravel and unfurl. He's got some fun characters in here. He usually does. And it just, like, the plot just goes really well. It's just, there's building dread. And of course, again, you know, we all know what Salem's Lot is. And we know it's about vampires. So I almost would have wished I didn't know at all, because that would make it even more effective. But this was super fun. Great obligatory Stephen King read. This was it. It's this very old 90s, like, mass paperback copy, which kind of reminds me of Animorphs. It kind of reminds me of Animorphs. It's ugly as sin, but I really like it. I like old mass paperbacks. So, this one was good. Next, we have A Hero of Our Time by Mikhail Lermontov. This was excellent. Russian classic, more towards the beginning of the 19th century, and this inspired a lot of other writers. Dostoevsky, Tolstoy. This is about a young man who's just a scoundrel. Like, that's really it. He's kind of what we would probably call today a sociopath or a narcissist, which they didn't have those words for this then. He's just a very self-centered man who's just kind of going about doing his thing. It's told in many different perspectives, so it's told from his diary, it's told from a friend of his who knows him, a friend of his who knows him who's telling a story to another man. It's told in all these different ways, which I found to be a little confusing. Probably warrants a reread, but still excellent. It's considered one of the first psychological novels, at least in Russian psychological novels, and that truly is the case, because his diary reveals a lot about what's actually going through his mind, and he sucks. He's not a good guy. Title apparently made a lot of people mad, because it's a little bit of an ironic title, like A Hero of Our Time, and he sucks, and everyone was a little like, no, we don't like that characterization, and Lermontov was like, sorry. Lermontov died really young. He died in a duel, so this is kind of what we got of him. I think there's a couple other writings, but this is his main one because he got into a duel, like men at that time used to do. I double dog dare you at the next family function you have to just slap this book onto the table. Our Prison's Obsolete by Angela Wide Davis. I dare you. At your next Thanksgiving, at your next family reunion, just go. Because that title is divisive. This was excellent, though. This was published in 2003, so albeit it's already a little outdated, I would love her to write, like, or come out with a new edition with a new introduction or a new afterword, or just a new edition with updated stats. But basically, Angela Y. Davis asks the question, are prisons obsolete? Do we still need prisons? Which is a whole complex conversation, but she lays it out so well. It's theory, but it's not like theory, not very academic writing. It's very accessible writing. So I think anybody truly can read this. She lays out the history of prisons. She lays out the growing supermax prisons, which again, 2003, it's so much more of a thing now. And then asking the question, like, do we really need these, and what would be possible alternatives to this? And it really did change my way of thinking about prisons, because I always just went, well, prisons are just, it's almost inevitable. We have houses, we go to work, we have prisons. Like, I just always found them to be more of an inevitability of humanity rather than a construction. But really, at the end of the day, everything is a construction, and that's for another video, another time. This just asked the question. It just posed it. It just went, hey, think about this. And I think that's very interesting. So I highly recommend picking this up, just taking in mind the Supermax numbers are way more these days than it even was in 2003. So take that with a grain of salt. I read this because the movie was coming out. Killers of the Flower Moon by David Gron. Fabulous writer, David Gron. Again, nonfiction, very narrative, very readable, very approachable. This story is freaking crazy. This is insane. The fact we didn't learn about this in school, I'm like, what the heck? Like, this teaches you this encompasses everything. Our treatment of Native Americans, the displacement of Native Americans, the growth and the dependence on oil, the birth of the FBI. Like, this tells you so much. And I'm like, why didn't we learn about this? Why didn't I hear a single thing about this until this book? Tragic story. Tragic, and so sad. And just further just makes me mad. Like, when I learn about Native Americans and I take it upon myself to learn as much as I can about Native Americans, I just continue to be angry. And this made me more angry, as per usual. But excellent writing. Excellent. If you've watched the movie, read the book. If you haven't watched the movie yet, read the book. The movie just emotionally made it even more so prescient. Whereas this is maybe a little bit more emotionally removed and much more pragmatic, but you gotta get the facts out. And he got the facts out, but he also put a good story together and did at the end really show the scope. Once he broadened out what was going on, I went, whoa, shoot, this was a real thing. Excellent. I cannot recommend more. I need to plug in the charger, which is somewhere. A good scent from a strange mountain. Again, classic short story collection. Some stories were great. The one I'm thinking of in particular, the one that I thought was the best one, it's called Love. Fabulous. The one Snow was very good too. But just classic short story. Only okay. I was a little disappointed by this one. Really not much to say, unfortunately. Next one was a book club read. This is Potiki by Patricia Grace. I've never actually read anything by a Maori writer, but this is about a group of Maori people, and they are being asked to leave their land because developers want to come and build basically an amusement water park. And the Maori people are like, no, what if we don't? But this was very good. This I only gave 3 stars because I really struggled with the writing, and I think a lot was missed on me. In the discussion with my book club, I picked up on a lot more, but the writing lost me a little bit, and I wasn't as moved as I thought I would be. Patricia Grace has said when she's talked about this book that she wanted to make it purposely very difficult for Western audiences to be able to read this, and I think she succeeded. But that also means I think I would need to do a deeper read on this. So, not my favorite book, unfortunately, but it was still very good. Some great characters in this. Real quick, audiobook I read. I'm getting more into audiobooks. Now that I drive to work instead of taking the train, I can't read while I drive. So I have been listening to more audiobooks, and I listened to There by Tommy Orange. Oh my god, so good. This is about a bunch of Native people in Oakland, California, and they're all getting ready, and they're all being tied around the big Oakland powwow that's going to happen. And it all leads up to the powwow. And you find out that all these characters are also somehow interconnected. And I love when stories do that. I love when you don't know how they're related, and then as it goes, you're like, Love that. Always love that in books and movies. For a debut novel, Tommy Orange, he knocked it out of the park. He had a talk at the Chicago library. They picked his book as the book of the year, and he did a whole talk, and I'll link it below. It was so good. And he's just so yeah, my book's famous. He was just very nonchalant, but the book was brilliant. And he's coming out with his new book. I believe it's coming out this year, and I will be on the lookout because it was excellent. Next, we have 3 Women by Lisa Tadeo. This is only okay. It's nonfiction. This woman, Lisa Tadeo, basically interviewed 3 women over a period, I think 8 years, over a period of time, about the impact and their relationship with desire and love. And it was okay. The one woman, Maggie, was groomed, let's just say it, was groomed by her teacher, and her relationship and her problems stemming from that. There's Lena, who has a husband who won't touch her. So fun. And then we have Sloane, who's a successful restaurant owner and whose husband is the chef at the restaurant, and they have just different views of what sex is. they've got they do some interesting stuff. I did care for Maggie because I just felt for her. It was awful. I did not really care too much about Lena. I was a little girl, that sucks, but also okay. Sloane I didn't care about. Sloane I was I'm sorry, you brought some of that onto yourself. I don't really care that much. And this book was interesting because a lot of times it was very compulsive to read, but there was a lack of analysis. Like I was like, ooh, it's like I'm reading like a juicy like magazine article about these women. But then there was a lack of like, and this is what it all means. Like especially Lena's story just left me and I went like, okay, who cares? Like I just left off. Real lack of analysis for 8 years of research, and I just was like, okay. So this is gonna go in a little free library. I think we're just gonna get rid of it. This book, no one talks about this book. It was out of print for a long time, but thanks to McNally Editions, it's back. This book was for my book club, and it was excellent. It is Daddy's Gone A-Hunting by Penelope Mortimer. Don't sleep on this book. Don't sleep on this book. Excellent. It was written in 1958, and for 1958, just so brave. I sounded like I was gonna cry. So brave. But no, brave. It's about this woman whose daughter is like 18, 19, she's at Oxford, and the daughter is like, confesses to her mom, I'm pregnant. And her mom's like, oh, okay. And it makes the mom like reflect on her life as a housewife. She's very unfulfilled. Her husband is just a piece of work, and she realizes she doesn't want her daughter to fall into that same trap as her. So she is like, I'm going to help you get an abortion. 1958, like, Penelope, you brave queen. And unfortunately, reading it, I'm like, this is a little too relevant. Like, it's a little too real. And we all at the book club were like, that's why this book is so important, and the conversations it has around that. It's also one of those books that's quiet, very English, reserved, subtle, but like a lot's just going like under the surface. The conversations with the husband and how gaslighty he is. Ugh! This turned out to be one of my favorites. It was at the very end of the year. It was due in December, but so good. I literally look like a little gremlin, like filming in the dead of night, but I swear we're almost done. We're on our last 3 books. And I gotta say, this third to last was really underwhelming. This is Popular Crime by Bill James. Little fact about me, I am very interested in true crime. I don't say I like true crime. We don't like it, we're interested in it. I just find it fascinating about how it's disseminated, how we engage with it, especially as Americans, we're very morbidly fascinated by it. And this book is supposed to be about that. It's supposed to be about how Americans have engaged with very sensational, popular crimes, basically from America's inception as a nation to now. This book was written in the mid-2000s, so the most recent cases they kind of talk about are already a little outdated. This was actually written before the verdict came out for Casey Anthony's trial. I'm sure he'd have opinions. This had a similar thing as 3 Women, where I kept wanting to read it. It was very compulsive. But I also was like, this is not that good. It basically was like when you go into a Wikipedia hole and you just start you start with like John Wayne Gacy, and then you just start clicking on other murderers and other crimes, and you get into that kind of hole. It had that kind of effect where I was like, yes, tell me about Lizzie Borden. Okay, now we're moving on to this one. Oh, now we're learning about this one. But there was a real lack of analysis here. And there is an editor. He thanks an editor in the acknowledgements. I never read the acknowledgements, but I had to go, let me see if he thanks an editor, because I don't think there was one here. And there was an editor. They shouldn't be an editor. He goes on weird rants that have nothing to do with it. He talks a lot about crime books and like his opinions on them. Not needed. Like, that's just not needed. And so there was a real lack of analysis on my end for this, and it just seemed to go on forever. There were certain chapters that were very well done. The Lizzie Borden chapter, I have to say, was well done, because that really presented that case in a whole new light and laid it out very well. And I kind of wished he just did like one big crime of every decade and just zoned in on those. But there were some chapters it was so haphazard, just like, and this crime, and then this crime, and then this crime, and then like a little halfway thesis about what this says about the 1980s. And then it just didn't work. It was very messy. And so this is, unfortunately, I just didn't think this was that great, and it could have been really good. So, last 2 books. We have The Phantom of the Opera by Gaston Leroux. This was great. This was really fun. I, for some reason, thought that the writing for this would be a lot more like, no, it actually really like The writing wasn't that beautiful, but the plot was good. We were here for the plot. If you know the musical, the basis of the musical is similar to the book, but the book is actually quite different. The basis is that there's this young, beautiful soprano, Christine Day, and she is basically enthralled with this ghost in the opera, this phantom of the opera, who becomes kind of like her mentor, patron, and then kidnaps her. The musical takes on a whole different approach. There's a more like magical elements, I'd say, even more in the book. And it's just great. Like, it just like was fascinating and I wanted to keep reading. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Like, it was fun. The Phantom's name is Eric, which kind of like, I was like, really? It's like in SpongeBob when Pearl like is talking about her date and like the fish clear and there's just one little like bald fish going meh. Like when they revealed his name was Eric, I was like, really? He's just a dude. And people make a big fuss over him, but I was like, no, at the end of the day, he's kind of a possessive, creepy weirdo. Like, I've never been Team Phantom, but I'm also not Team Raoul either, who's the love interest of Christine, the human, normal guy love interest of Christine, who I also think is just kind of a whiny guy. Like, none of these guys are, I think, good for her, but yeah, you do what you can do. So, The Phantom of the Opera. Very fun little classic. And then at last, our final book of the year, which was a great book to end on. Really fantastic. This was for the Game of Tomes book club, and I was so happy I read along with them for this one. It was Eugene Onegin by Pushkin. Take this. Arm yourself. This was excellent. Pushkin is known mostly for his poetry, so this was a novel in verse. Kind of starting almost the beginning of the year. Now we have another novel in verse. This was so excellent. Basically tells the story of Eugene Onegin, who is very similar to Lermontov's A Hero in Our Time, in that he is just kind of a young man who's kind of directionless. He's kind of bored. He's not as narcissistic, I'd say, and sociopathic as that other one. He's a little bit more self-aware and emotionally mature, but he is just kind of like, just going through life, I'm a little bored. And he meets, so his friend is engaged to a woman named Olga, and Olga has a sister named Tatiana, who Eugene meets, and Tatiana falls in love with him. And then all of these things kind of unfurl. And it's tragic. It ends tragically, and it also just ends on such a discordant note. But one that I was like, yes, girl. Slay queen. The fact he could do this in verse is so impressive to me. He wrote this all in verse, and it's beautiful. She does not raise him, does not falter, not from his greedy lips withdraws. Her nerveless hand she does not alter, her fixed regard throughout the pause. It has a very interesting rhyme structure, and he's able to do that for the whole story. So impressive. This was excellent. Really, really an excellent way to end the year. So, Eugene Onegin. I'll be reading more Pushkin. Also reading more Russian classics. I do love the Russian classics, so this was an excellent one to end on. And there you have it, folks. I tried to make it as brief as possible. Those were all the books I read in 2023. My sweet little brief comments on them. And just by doing this, I've gotten some really good video ideas, in which I'll talk about them probably in more depth, because some of them really do deserve way more discussed about them, and more people should be reading them. Like, there should be whole discussions on The Wide Sargasso Sea and Daddy's Gone A-Hunting. More people should be talking about them, so I will be promoting them. You'll see them more on this channel. But I'm hopefully putting out more videos this year, just hopefully every week, every other week. And keeping you more updated so I don't have to do a giant video like this at the very beginning of the next year, because I want to talk to you more about books and as we keep going along. DNFs, I'll talk about DNFs later. We won't do that now. Well, I'll do a whole video on DNFs because I don't really often DNF a book, but I did 2 this year, but I'll talk about them later. But for now, if you've gotten this far, thank you, because truly, it's just you and me sitting in the dark right now. I literally feel like a little gremlin. But thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for reading. If you have made it this far, leave a comment about what you read and what was your favorite book of 2023. I want to hear about it. But other than that, subscribe if you want to. I'll be here. I'll be talking about books. Bye. Bye.